Hi everyone, I'm Lee Mingle. I'm the editor here at the Web Host Industry Review, and I would like to welcome you all to another one of our WHIR webinars. Today's session is called The Web Hosting Industry is at Risk. Learn more about the Save Hosting Coalition. And it's going to feature a panel discussion with two of the founding members of that very coalition, Servint's Chief Operating Officer, Christian Dawson, and distinguished attorney and counselor and regular WHIR contributor, David Snead. I will get to Christian and David properly in a moment. But before we go any further, I'd just like to take care of a couple of quick housekeeping items. First of all, questions. Usually we save about 10 minutes at the end of these things for attendee questions, and we will do that this time. However, this is intended to be a very sort of collaborative back and forth kind of discussion. So if you have questions that you want to submit throughout the presentation, use the controls in the webinar software to submit your questions. I'll keep an eye on those throughout, and if something comes up that's relevant to what's being discussed at the moment, I will certainly do my best to bring all the questions up, as they fit into the conversation. Secondly, I will be putting all the relevant links for the coalition on screen at the end of the webinar. So if you're looking for the means to get in touch with the presenters, or to ask questions, offer up, time or services to get involved in some other way, you can rest assured that all the info will be on screen shortly. Of course, there will be a video archive of the webinar available online at thewhir.com/webinars as of early next week. So if you want to share this with somebody else, or if you have to leave early and you want to come back and watch the rest, any of those kind of things, it'll be there alongside a lot of our great past webinars. So before we get started, I wanted to extend our thanks to HostingCon for sponsoring the webinar. HostingCon, as you may know, is a premier conference and trade show for the hosted services industry. It's because of the sponsorship that we can deliver this kind of content, and of course, great content is at the heart of what HostingCon is all about. The Save Hosting effort actually first really came together in San Diego at HostingCon 2011, and the event, HostingCon that is, will be heading to Boston in July of 2012. Facilitating the same kind of collaborative industry effort. So head over to hostingcon.com to find out more about registering for or sponsoring next year's event. Super early bird rates are available right now, but not for too much longer. And exhibitor spots for HostingCon are already starting to fill up. So if you want to get in early on those, please head over there now. I'm going to bring up our panelists on the slide here, and there they are. And let's get right to it. So let's start out with something kind of deceptively simple. Save hosting from what? What is the threat to the hosting business that we're talking about here? Maybe you could start on this one, Christian.
Sure. As to look at it broadly, the big thing that hosting needs to be saved from is the fact that we have no voice when it comes to public policy legislation. The fact is that unlike most mature industries, we don't have an association out there watching our backs, making sure that nothing that happens on the legislation front is going to negatively affect our business. So there are certainly organizations out there that sort of tangentially benefit what it is we do, but there's a big group that there's always going to be issues that that are counter to our interests, and right now they're mounting. One of the things that we are really concerned about is something called the Protect IP Act. We're going to talk a great deal about that, but if you want to take a look at what the hosting industry is under threat by, you can look at it broadly. The fact that we don't have a voice is the number one reason that we're under threat. But more specifically, pieces of legislation, specifically like the Protect IP Act and the recently announced Stop Online Privacy Act, are the types of things that we're really focused our attention on.
Okay, so let's get really specific here and talk about the pieces of legislation that pose the most direct and immediate danger to the hosting business. David, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure. So the first and most pressing issue is the Protect IP Act, or PIPA. And PIPA is it's the second coming of legislation that continues to percolate on the Hill. And right now, the only thing that has kept PIPA from being voted on in the Senate is a procedural maneuver that was a hold was put on it by Senator Wyden. So that's the only thing that's kept it from being enacted by the Senate, and there really is no doubt that if this piece of legislation went to the Senate floor, it would be enacted. So really, what's wrong with PIPA? Well, we've been looking at PIPA for a while, and there are a couple of main issues that we're focused on. And you'll see that that our concerns about this piece of legislation are reflected on the savehosting.org website. But the first issue that we're really concerned about is a definitional issue, and this issue really has to do with the fact that hosting companies appear to be included within the definition of entities that are subject to litigation or subject to private rights of action in PIPA. There's no safe harbor in PIPA like there is in the DMCA. I'm sure everybody understands how the DMCA works in its safe harbor protection. Well, PIPA doesn't have that safe harbor for entities who are providing services to infringing people who are alleged to infringe. The other issue with litigation is that the legislation borrows terms from other pieces of legislation. That legislation or those terms are going to have to be litigated to get to determine what they actually mean. The second issue is that the Act doesn't give the targets of suits or targets of actions by the U.S. Attorney the ability to defend themselves. It's a shoot first and ask questions later statute. So that means if your customers deploy a new piece of technology that an intellectual property rights holder feels will violate or has potential to violate their rights, they can either sue or get the Attorney General to petition for an injunction to shut down the technology. So what that means is that it really stifles innovation. The third thing that we're really concerned about from a legislative standpoint is that it really screws with the security of the DNS system because it allows courts to require DNS providers to redirect DNS to, in some cases, sites that are chosen by the Attorney General. It really has the potential to undermine the security of the DNS system because you'll have conflicting DNS responses, and in particular, we're concerned that it's going to undermine secure DNS. There are also two policy issues that we're concerned about. The first is that it's going to cause hosting customers who are outside the U.S. to flee U.S. hosting providers to hosting providers in other countries whose laws don't provide for as much ambiguity. And indeed, some of my clients have seen an outflow of their non-U.S. customers because some domains have been seized, and so it's really undermining the stability of the U.S. legal process relating to the Internet. And the second policy issue is we're concerned that it's going to undermine the DMCA because it borrows the term enabling infringement from the DMCA, and the Recording Industry Association has come out and publicly said that they believe that hosting providers are enabling infringement by providing hosting services to infringing entities. So we really see them using this statute as an end run around the safe harbors in the DMCA. So that's PIPA. The other is it's being called the E-Parasite Act, and it has some of the same issues that are present in PIPA. The main concern that and I've only read it briefly, I've It actually took about an hour and a half to read, but I've only digested it briefly. The other concern with the E-Parasite Act is that it too is going to undermine the DMCA. So those are the big issues and pressing legislation on the Hill right now.
It sounds friendly when you call it PIPA, but when you describe it,
well, it's better than calling it Protect IP, which
right. So let's and this is maybe a difficult question to answer or a complicated question to answer, but let me ask you this: what specifically needs to change about the legislation, or is that indeed what you're setting out to do here, is to influence the legislation so that it ends up being different, or are you trying to sort of stop it from happening altogether?
Well, here's the thing, and just as a point of, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, these two bills, you've got the Senate bill, which is called PIPA, the Protect IP Act, and then the one that just got released a couple of days ago. It's the corresponding, or basically sister bill, that has been introduced in Congress. And the idea is that the goal is to get them both passed, and then they would go into some sort of a committee to negotiate the differences between the two bills and send one up to be signed. But that's when we're talking about two bills that are fairly similar and we don't really know a lot about one yet. I want to give people the context for what that is. It's the Senate bill and then the House version of the bill. When it comes down to the question of how they should change, well, one of the things we're attempting to do is get in there and say, there's a lot of things that we don't like about what's happening here. And that's in part because we don't think you really understand how our industry works. And what you're doing is ultimately trying to legislate our industry and the ins and outs of what it is we need to do to respond to intellectual property situations. We're not saying that there's not a problem and we don't need legislation. We're not saying that, oh, don't put any laws on the hosting industry. But we're saying, let's talk about what solutions might make more sense. Let's figure out what's a more realistic situation that doesn't potentially collapse our industry within the United States without really solving the problem. So, I mean, the answer is there's a good deal, but we'd really like to be a part of the lawmaking process, like the people on the other end, the people who are trying to, quote unquote, protect intellectual property are doing.
Okay, so I see this as being, or I'm interpreting this as being two sort of very related, but not identical objectives here, right? One, you want to influence the Protect IP Act, and two, you want to have influence, right? Are those different objectives or separate?
We want the industry to have influence. I don't care whether I have influence.
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. You want hosting to have a voice at the table, or a seat at the table when this kind of legislation is being discussed and developed, and you want specific things about Protect IP to change to reflect the realities of the hosting business. I mean, are those
big? Yeah, definitely. Well, here's the big fear. I mean, most of the laws that legislate the hosting industry were created during the Clinton administration in the very early days of the Internet, and basically Congress wanted to take a very pro-Internet business approach to their legislation because they didn't want to kill the Internet in its infancy. Now you've got one of the fastest growing segments of the U.S. economy in an economy that isn't growing the way that they want it to be, and they're looking at the situation differently. And so now is a time when we think that a lot of legislation is going to be focused on our industry, particularly because a lot of stuff is happening around cloud. Cloud's a big buzzword. Everybody's talking about it. It's happening inside of our industry. A lot of people are having security concerns. I don't want to get too far off of PIPA, but there's a lot of things in our industry where we feel as though there are going to be lawmakers taking a close look at what it is we're doing. That's fine, but if the industry as a whole doesn't have a we, doesn't have a group, doesn't have I don't know, any sort of influence on the Hill to affect public policy, it's going to happen with or without us, so it might as well happen with us.
And let me follow up on that. I'm pretty sure that almost everybody who's on the call has had an experience where they've been explaining to someone what their business is, and people say, "What's web hosting?" And they have no idea, and they really don't understand how web hosting really facilitates internet commerce. And it's the same thing on the Hill. And honestly, when you explain to legislators what web hosts do and how they facilitate internet commerce, they almost always totally get it and say, "Oh, I can see how this would be a problem for you." So it's really these two bills, although they're fundamentally flawed, are a great opportunity to bring the industry to the Hill and say, here's what you can do to actually facilitate commerce and help our industry, and don't accidentally do things that are really going to jeopardize our business and jeopardize the ability of people to transact commerce over the net.
Okay, so my understanding, and I could be wrong here, but this is the way I understand it, is that the MPAA and the RIA, through some excellent lobbying and excellent expert maneuvering in that sort of realm, have more or less written big chunks of these legislations, or these pieces of legislation. I mean, is the objective here that the hosting industry have a group that is considered as much an authority on the issue, so that when people are trying to create these laws, they say, okay, well, we need to talk to this group? Is that what we're trying to do here?
I think that go ahead, Christian.
No, please, go ahead.
I think that would be a great result, but I don't think that we're thinking that far ahead. I think right now things are in the formative stages, and whatever the group becomes is yet to be determined.
I think that's absolutely true. We have some things that we're trying to basically inform the rest of the industry, trying to give them some things that they can do to help make a difference with this piece of legislation, and trying to ask people if they want to come together and volunteer time and resources. What that is going to end up being is going to go beyond the wishes and desires of me and David and a couple of other individuals who have so far provided their time and energy. That's a question for the industry once we get the industry talking. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So I know that there have been recently and in the past efforts by certain hosting companies. I know that GoDaddy has and SoftLayer have sort of made efforts to have a voice in certain issues of legislation, and have sort of gone to Congress to speak on certain issues. But those have been on a more individual basis, or on a very individual basis. I guess, can you sort of put into perspective what the benefit of a more collaborative effort between the hosting industry would be, and also what that might look like ultimately?
Well, to put it in even, we could say, well, you could have a certain amount of effect if you're GoDaddy or your SoftLayer and you go and talk to Congress. But if you want to put it in even sort of broader sweeping terms, Google has a big lobbying effort. They have influence, but one of the problems that Google has when they attempt to go in there and influence legislation is that they go in there and they say, this is going to have a negative effect on us and every company like us. Well, they can't really say that because there's really no companies like Google. One of the benefits that this industry has is, because it is so fragmented and made up of small to medium businesses, that if we start talking about what our role is in public policy, it's a very compelling story for legislators who hear, well, this is an industry that's made up of businesses, small to medium businesses, which is supposedly the ones that they really care about, in every state in this country, representing jobs in every district. I think that being able to say that far outweighs the ability to say, for one company to say, well, we're a relatively successful business representing jobs in our particular area. You have more power if you do have a collective message, which is what we're trying to do with, for instance, the letter that we put out today, standing against the Protect IP Act, which if you go to safehosting.org, you can find a link to and sign as an industry professional.
So when you say letter, it's kind of a petition?
It's a petition, yeah, right. Because basically collective voice is very important. Hearing from a broad swath of the industry is extremely important, and you end up having a lot more power than when you're any single company, even if it's as big as a company as Google.
Okay, and this is something that maybe we glossed over before, and let's get back to this before we move on to anything else. But as pertains specifically to PIPA, what kind of a timeline are we talking about here? Like, if we were to do nothing, or if the hosting industry were to do nothing, what would ultimately be what would the timeline look like of it being implemented if it started to impact hosting?
So I don't think that anybody knows what the timeline is, although when we've talked to people on the Hill, the general consensus is that if there's going to be opposition to PIPA or changes to PIPA, it needs to happen it needs to happen now, with the anticipation that any changes will be put in the early winter, so that would be in January. We understand that there's been some negotiation between Senator Leahy, who's the sponsor, and Senator Wyden about changes Senator Wyden would like to see being made. But the good thing about that is if Senator Leahy is negotiating with Senator Wyden, there's also the opportunity for other senators to be involved in the negotiation process to get changes made. So the timeline, let's say that changes are made or no changes are made, and it's voted on in the Senate. Either it has to be introduced as separate legislation in the House after it's passed in the Senate, or this new act that was introduced in the House has to pass, and then they'll be reconciled in a conference committee and then presented to the president for signature. So, all things going quickly, you would see legislation on the president's desk probably in the spring or the summer, but the issue is now is the time to act, because now is the time that you have influence on the legislation. Once something passes or goes to conference, there's, particularly within an industry that doesn't have a lot of experience participating in the political process, there's not going to be any time to make changes.
Absolutely. I'm going to go back again to the letter that is on our website at safehosting.org. We have a letter up there that we're attempting to get industry professionals to sign. We are going to bring that letter to the Hill, and hopefully other volunteers are going to bring this letter to the Hill, to people, to Congress, to legislators that they're able to influence, and use it as a tool to show that this industry has a collective voice and is really opposed to this particular piece of legislation. So the time to do that is definitely now for the Protect IP Act. And should this Stop Online Privacy Act, E-Parasites Act, and it's confusing because there are really, David, there's two names for this bill? Is that right?
Yeah, well, they just renamed it the E-Parasite Act.
Okay, so it's no longer the Stop Online Privacy Act?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, E-Parasites Act. Sorry about that. So this brand new act, there's already there's a session to discuss this on the 16th of November. So we're just a couple of weeks away from that really getting underway and being discussed, which I don't know, it could be the potential for to put it on a fast track. We're already working on a letter for that as well. But the goal is to act now, to get signatures in so that we have the tools necessary to try and show people that this industry cares about these pieces of legislation. When we sat down with Senator Wyden's staff, they said one of the problems that we have is we're standing alone up here holding up this bill. We can't be standing alone. You guys need to go out there, with a grassroots industry effort and give us the tools necessary in order to influence the conversation now. You can do that through your collective voice with things like this letter, or you can get other senators on board with standing opposed to it the way that Senator Wyden is.
Okay, so let's talk about Safe Hosting Coalition as sort of in terms of objectives, both short-term and long-term. So you mentioned the letter petition that's up on the site right now. What are the sort of short-term objectives? What kind of things have you been working on already? What kind of things are you planning to do, in the immediate future?
Well, David?
You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, right now we see the Protect IP Act as the number one thing that we need to get on top of right away. So this letter is the number one initiative that we've got going at the moment. In addition to it being extremely timely, it's also it's an important example of the way in which we need to come together regularly as an industry to try and find ways to affect public policy and have a singular voice on issues. So it's a galvanizing force, hopefully. So a campaign about the Protect IP Act and what it will do to this industry is first and foremost. We are going to be working over the next couple of weeks to figure out whether something similar needs to be done for the E-Parasites Act, which I was referring to earlier as SOPA. There are a number of potential pieces of legislation that we have our eye on, but you're talking about a very small group of volunteers. So there's only a limited amount that can be done. So one of the things that we are really asking for is assistance in taking information that has been provided on safehosting.org, and in particular this letter, and potentially a subsequent letter that may come out with regards to this E-Parasites Act, and to do what you can to try and take it viral. Maybe that's just using your own Twitter and Facebook feeds. Maybe it's telling your customers. Maybe it's creating an online video. Maybe it's, I don't know, setting up a phone bank. I don't know what it's going to take. But we definitely need help spreading the word about those matters. Beyond that, we need not just volunteers, but volunteers who have ideas on how they can step in and create initiatives that are going to help make a difference and drive us towards our overarching goals. Because honestly, if we had a list of people that said that they wanted to volunteer and we're waiting for assignments, I don't know that we actually have assignments to give to people. We need people to come in with desire to help and an idea in which on how to apply their help. As far as additional goals, one of the other things that we are actively pursuing is a way to solicit donations, because we do see the possibility that we're going to be able to do more if we can collect funds. So that is definitely on our radar.
So in addition to the organizing efforts, which I have to tell you are the getting volunteers and people who are willing to get in and dig in and help out, there are some additional ways that the industry can have influence. So one particular way is with regulations. So, for example, the Copyright Office is right now soliciting input into some changes to the way that they implement the DMCA and registration for the DMCA. I don't see anything that's a particular concern to hosts in that, but certainly there's the opportunity to influence more than legislation. And to be quite honest, the things that really will hurt or just provide a lot of background noise for business is actually the regulations and things like that. So there's really a good opportunity to be involved, not just in the legislative process, but also in regulations, and also at the local level. Certainly there's opportunity for people to go and meet their representatives and help them understand how the industry works.
Okay, so you guys certainly partly touched on this in answering the last question, but let's talk very specifically about what can somebody do who wants to get involved in the safe hosting effort. So, somebody walks away from this session today, what can they do today to get involved? And I think that probably I can help you out because I do have some contact info that you guys gave me that I'll, handsome as you both are, I'm going to switch off the slide that has you guys. But please.
Well, the most low-impact thing that you could do, and something that is very necessary, is to help spread the word. To particularly spread the word within this industry about the letter. Get people to sign on to it, and that can assist this industry's efforts in putting forward our opinion about the Protect IP Act. Signing up for more information on our website is important, because when additional things like that come up, such as potentially a similar letter about the parasites bill, then you can help us take action on that. Beyond that, it's kind of like what I said before. There's this coalition can be whatever the industry wants it to be and needs it to be. If people say they need an association, get enough people together, and we can help build an association. If people within this industry decide that what they really need is to really just continue the way that we're continuing now, and really keeping a close eye on a regular basis on legislation and keeping people informed and educated, and that's what we do as well, but hopefully with a bigger base and more resources than just, again, the few people that we have volunteering so far. So we want people to step up and say, this is what I think this industry needs, and this is how I can contribute, and help shape what it is we are becoming. David, what do you think?
No, I agree with you. I think that there's going to be lots of opportunities to participate and shape things, and certainly no one who's working on it now thinks that they have all the answers. So now's the time to get involved.
Particularly if you have all the answers.
That would be particularly appreciated, actually.
Yeah.
So specifically to get involved, there's contact info on safehosting.org, and the petition itself is safehosting.org/PIPA petition. That's right?
That's correct. We're attempting to fill a void that this industry certainly has, and we need people's help in filling it.
Okay, well, here's another question then. So let's be positive and assume that you're very successful in altering or influencing Protect IP and what that ultimately ends up looking like. Does that change the mandate of the coalition? Is there something else out there that needs attention right away? Are there other sort of more long-term goals that you're looking at? How do things look past, or to what extent are you looking past Protect IP to say, we need a voice here and here and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the industry needs a voice, basically with federal regulators. There is, in this Congress, there's going to be legislation that passes that regulates security breach notification and privacy breaches. And both those pieces of legislation are going to it's likely going to direct the Federal Trade Commission to issue rulings or issue regulations implementing the laws. And so that's going to be a great opportunity for people to get involved and say, okay, this is what we see a security breach to mean. This is how it would impact us. This is how we would have problems providing notice. There's also in states, and this is something that a couple of hosting companies have been very active in. There have been states that have been trying to pass laws that tax data centers in a particular way. So to the extent that people in the states actually hear about that stuff, there's the opportunity for groups of hosts to get together to work on issues that are important to them. And it doesn't have to all be legislative, as Christian alluded to before. To the extent that people who are involved think that a more robust association is necessary, there's always the possibility that this will become something that is a little bit broader, with a broader mandate than just trying to influence legislation both at the federal and the state level.
The way that I see it, this industry is maturing. Cloud is going to exacerbate that. We've got a lot of bigger businesses coming in right now, and they're going to speed up the maturation of this industry. And when that has happened in the past, we've seen regulation comes. The eyes aren't going off of this industry, and that's not necessarily a bad thing unless there is a complete lack of cohesion in the organization and voice and message, which, is really what we've got now. I think that it would be great if this was the beginning of a series of conversations that this industry had that led us down a path of taking control of public policy initiatives for the industry, basically having a voice that can help influence policy as it comes. Just take a look at the telco industry as an example of a heavily regulated industry that was as fragmented as ours just a few years ago. And you can see that if history is any indicator, this is coming. I would like to see it being the beginning of a series of conversations that lead us down the road of potentially things like lobbyists. Lobbyist isn't necessarily a bad word. It's certainly not a bad word when it's your industry that's being protected. But that's a potential goal.
Okay.
One of many. And it all comes down. Well, I mean, one of many. It really comes down to what it is. The people that want to get involved and help us in this effort end up feeling the industry needs.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's all the questions that I've written out now. I would like to invite everyone who's in attendance here to submit any questions of their own, although just because the function is called questions doesn't mean that it has to be questions. Let's call it comments, questions, concerns, general remarks. Any of those would be welcome. We've got a few minutes left, quite a few minutes left if we want to do that, or if nobody has any questions, I mean, we can wrap this up a little early and keep it a little bit compact. It doesn't look like we're having any questions coming in, so I'm going to start wrapping things up if that's all right with you guys. I would like to thank everyone who attended. And of course, I would like to thank Christian and David for presenting some. We do have a question here before we wrap up. Somebody said they jumped in late, but they wanted to know if anyone addressed what GoDaddy and 1&1 are doing. Now, I don't know if that's maybe quite specific enough. We did briefly discuss GoDaddy sort of speaking in Congress on certain issues of policy or law. I don't know if this is what you're referring to. Lobbying activity. So we did address it a little bit. I think what was said was that, if I could paraphrase Christian, I think was that the fact that or the potential for us to speak as, or sort of the potential for the hosting industry to speak with one voice and to say, look, we are all these businesses that influence or that create jobs in all these jurisdictions or areas, has more potential to influence government than that potentially.
There are certainly big hosts that can go in there and they can try and do they can tackle the lobbying effort for us. If you think that their industries, their needs will always be served by the needs of basically the industry as a whole. That's great. I honestly can't tell you much about GoDaddy's specific lobbying efforts, but
sorry. I can comment on that a little bit because I was at a hearing where GoDaddy's general counsel spoke. GoDaddy is taking a much different view of this legislation than I think we're taking. Their view is they can do things to implement it, and this is just my opinion. My opinion is the reason that they say that is they're such a significantly larger company with so many more resources that they can, for example, weather any litigation that's brought against them, and they can spend quite a bit of money on compliance issues. So they are looking at this as a way to show a good face to legislators about their ability to stamp out piracy. And that's my view of their lobbying campaign.
Somebody has submitted something here that's actually quite related to what you're saying, which is that they say it seems that in its current form, PIPA would benefit larger ISPs who offer hosting as a secondary service because they have a lower sort of threshold of threat than smaller web hosts like the company of the person submitting the comment here. Does that sort of speak to what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. I mean, I would say if I were a conspiracy theorist, I would say that one of the reasons larger companies are supporting this legislation is it's a good way to increase the cost of entry in the internet world, particularly if you have to comply with a bunch of regulations and if there's this constant threat of getting shut down by the Attorney General.
Right. The impact that a single complaint could have on your business is much greater.
Yeah, I mean, defending a complaint costs $40,000 right out of the gate.
Right. Okay. A couple other questions here. Somebody wants to know if there's a program or any sort of effort, underway to get vendors who support or distribute to the hosting industry involved in this effort.
We've mostly been talking to our industry friends, and David and I are lucky enough to have a lot of industry friends. We've also gotten the chance to speak at a couple of different conventions, meetings, been sponsored by HostingCon, and at a couple of WHIR events, as well as some other events. So we've been able to spread the word as far as that goes. But that's an issue where people can help. If you're interested in finding out whether we've brought this idea to company X, Y, or Z and industry X, Y, or Z, and you might have some influence in that area, reach out. Maybe, maybe not.
Another comment here from somebody who says that they have contacted their senators, their state senators, but have not heard anything back from either one of them, and considers that sort of a fairly good evidence that we probably need lobbyists here. I mean, can you talk about that?
Well, I can talk about that. Quite honestly, the feedback that I've received the 3 times I've gone to the Hill to talk about this issue is honestly the exact opposite. Is that the industry, business people who come to the Hill and meet with their senators and who talk with them actually are generally, the message is more effective than a lobbyist. And I do think it's pretty easy to get to meet with senators. I mean, hell, if D.C. is crawling with lawyers, and so if I can get a meeting on the Hill, somebody who's not a lawyer can probably get a meeting a little bit faster. So I would say that could just be that particular senator or legislator.
I guess the one caveat I'll say there, because I agree with David as far as that goes, but as far as advancing our cause, like I said, we are looking into things like fundraising, and when you're looking to where you would want to apply dollars, you're looking at wanting to increase your coordination. Part of the efforts of what you would call a lobbying effort, even if you're doing it through actual business people that are doing the labor, is to be able to take the administrative portion of coordinating who has to go where to do what, to influence who, and putting it into the hands of somebody who has the time and resources to do it. And so in so much as that is a part of lobbying effort, that's the one difference I would say to what David was saying. Does that make sense at all? Did I just convolute the whole thing?
I think it made sense.
We do need coordination, even if we don't need lobbyists speaking for us.
Right.
Yeah, and don't take my comment to mean that we don't need coordination. I tell you what, the fewer meetings I have to coordinate, the better.
All right. Well, I think that appears to be all the stuff that we've seen submitted here, and I do appreciate everyone submitting some great questions there. Once again, I'd like to thank Christian and David for offering up some great insight into, what I think we can call probably one of the major concerns in the hosting industry today. I'd also like to thank HostingCon once again for sponsoring today's session. I would like to remind everyone that this session will be archived along with a lot of other great WHIR webinars at thewhir.com/webinars, and that can be both if you'd like to revisit the webinar yourself, or if you'd like to send somebody else to it and say, hey, you know what, check this out, some interesting stuff came up. We'll also be returning on November 16th with a session called Learn How 1,000 Plus Cloud Service Providers Are Making Money with Veeam Software. And you can find out more about that session in the same spot, thewhir.com/webinars.